This week on BSD Now, Allan's back from EuroBSDCon. We're going to get to hear all of his wrap-up, and we also have a great interview with Benno Rice from Isilon. We've got to discuss some of the pain of doing major forklift upgrades and why your business should always track current. BSD Now, episode 110, Firmware Fights, recorded October 7th, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Allan Jude.
And we're glad to have you guys with us. It's been a few weeks since we've been here live to do this, so this is exciting to be back. I know you're going to have a ton of stories to tell about Euro, Allan, right? Yep. I hope it was a good time. Very good. I really did miss you guys, so I'll get my thing out of the way. I did not end up going to Ohio Linux Fest. I got sick and was in the hospital for a couple days, so sorry about that. I told you guys I would be there, but wasn't able to make it. So my brother Ken had gone up. So if you said hi to him, thanks for doing that. But I don't have any interesting stories aside from getting blood drawn and stuff. So nothing cool there. But I'm sure Allan has actual BSD stories to tell us about. So I do want to hear, Allan, how did Euro go? And first of all, before I forget, did they announce where the next Euro is?
Yes, so the next Euro is going to be in Belgrade, Serbia.
Oh, yes. Okay.
That'll be interesting. And it's going to be organized by Stojana, who did the Sofia one. So she has more experience than any of the people that have volunteered before. Because I think it's
did she move?
No, it's just Serbia is nearby, and she's just going to
close enough that she'll do that. That's cool.
You know, she does conference organizing quite a bit, so I think the conference will benefit a lot from that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. She gets to take the experience of last year's,
and
so that's great.
And so the opening keynote was Paul Vixie, who gave a great talk about his history of using BSD and how he got into stuff and how his whole career went. It was very entertaining. I like that. And about halfway through, he took off the big sweater he had on to reveal underneath he had a Bind 8 is Dead t-shirt.
Nice.
Which got him a whole round of applause just for that.
That's great.
But yes, it was nice to see more people like that. You know, we saw Steve Bourne and Andrew Tannenbaum and so on come out to conferences at Euro in Canada this year, and seeing Paul Vixie out at Euro again was cool as well.
That's nice. Kind of like some of the Hall of Famers here, being able to come out to these conferences.
Yes.
That's cool.
The other interesting thing is they did the live stream through YouTube. And so recordings of that are available immediately.
That is cool.
The downside is that they are in giant chunks. So like one of the videos is like 5 hours and covers all the talks of that morning.
So you might be doing a little seeking and finding on those videos.
The one you're looking for. But so they're basically broke up into the 3 different rooms. You can see on the schedule here, yellow, blue, and red. And then I think there's somewhere between 3 and 6 videos in each of those. I don't know if everything's posted yet, but it's all the video is there. You just might have to search around a little bit to find it.
Okay. I wonder if people can go and add like the timestamps and the notes or something, like seek to this if you want.
I think the OpenBSD Undeadly blog has some links that I think might have done that. I don't know if they had the timestamps, but they had figured out which talks are in which video anyway, which is half the battle.
Well, hey, if that's something one of you guys out in the audience wants to do, I'm sure they would appreciate that if you send in a list of like these are the timestamps and whatnot. That may be helpful for others who are getting on here to watch these.
I could only see so many of the talks, but I heard good things about quite a few of them. There's, I won't go over the whole schedule here, but one of the capstone announcements we're going to hold off for until a later story, not to let that spoil you, but there was also another person kind of slightly outside the BSD usual crowd that came out was Anders Magnusson, who was talking about the portable C compiler. But he also did a second talk on the second day about running a vacuum tube computer. A vacuum tube computer that runs BSD.
Which BSD? Like,
I'm not sure. It might have been one of the old ones just because it needed to be so small.
Right? Yeah, it's running ZFS, and I got all this redundancy.
Yeah.
Oh.
I was in Kirk McCusick's talk, A Brief History of the BSD Fast File System, which was quite illuminating as well, as I get more and more interested in file systems.
Yes. Oh, that's pretty slick. Well, that's great. So it sounds like a good time. Do you have any estimates on numbers of people that were there? Did it seem bigger?
244, I think, which was about average for EuroBSDCon. The interesting thing was with the show of hands, the number of people who it was their first EuroBSDCon was quite high, like 30 plus. And while just walking around talking to people in the hallway or so, there were about 10 people who said they only came to the conference because they heard about it on the podcast.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Getting the word out.
And the other interesting one was, I think it was on the Sunday, one of the organizers came up to me and was like, could you come with me for a minute? I'm like, oh, okay. And they get into this little backstaging room where they keep all the food and everything. And he's like, I'm a huge fan of the podcast and everything. And he gave me this little thing of Swedish licorice, which I haven't had the courage to try yet.
Right? You have to do that.
I haven't been awake long enough yet. Once I get caught up on sleep, I'll try that. And actually autographed his, he had one of the TechSnap 100 shirts from ages ago. And so I had to autograph that for him. And I did some autographs of the ZFS book. And, it was nice to meet quite a few people. Also saw some people like the rerun interview we were showing as we were doing the pre-show for this a couple of minutes ago. Was our interview with Christina. You remember from EuroBSDCon last year? Well, she was there this year again and says hi to you and me. And she took a couple copies of the FreeBSD Foundation's flyer that has the picture of the group of ladies that was at EuroBSDCon last year. And she's like, oh, look, I'm famous. I'm going to have to autograph these and give them to my friends.
That's cool. Well, that reminds me, was there a lot of other GSOC students that made it out this year?
There were a couple, but not as many as at AsiaBSDCon last year, where they really made an effort to get more of the younger people to the conference. Okay. But kind of speaking of that type of thing in particular, the other thing they announced during the closing ceremony, during the opening, they announced that, obviously the conference was dedicated to the memory of Paul Schenkeveld, our great friend there, but at the end of the conference, they also announced the Paul Schenkeveld Memorial Travel Grant, which is people can apply to travel grant at EuroBSDConFoundation.org, and they will pick one person each year to get a travel grant that will pay for their flight, hotel, conference, entry, and etc. Somebody who's a big part of the community or would be very valuable to have, but can't afford to come.
Okay, great. Well, we have the links, it looks like, to the Twitter pictures of the announcement for that here as well.
Handily Dan took a quick picture of the slide while it was up at the conference. My camera was too slow.
Okay. Right.
But I think that's a great way to remember Paul.
Yeah, that's a fitting tribute.
Because just before that, they did a show of hands of who's been to every single BSDCon, or EuroBSDCon, and it was the first time there wasn't somebody with their hand up.
Okay. Well, great. Well, it sounds like a good time was had by all. When did you get in? Yesterday?
I got in Monday night. And
so you're
trying to catch up still, yeah. And then I also have a link here to Olivier Robert posted the pictures he took during the conference. He's got a bunch of great pictures of people and things that were there.
Great. Well, hope you guys enjoy those videos. How many hours total of videos do we have then? Is that?
Well, if they're each talk's an hour, it's 3.
How many talks? You got a lot there, basically.
Yeah, there's like 12 plus hours each day, not counting the keynotes.
Oh, man. Okay. Yeah. So you got a lot of stuff to watch if you want to get a big BSD fix. Again, we have the links to the YouTube channels here for the different rooms. So definitely check those out. There'll be a lot of good info in there, I'm sure, especially if you couldn't make it.
Yeah. The closing keynote was also especially good. It was one of the people that architected the internet when it first came to Sweden in the 80s. And talked about how it progressed up to now and so on. And it was quite a good talk.
So which room were the keynotes
the red one.
Red, yellow, or blue room? Okay, the red room. So the first one.
It was the biggest room, so that's they did that.
Okay. So if you're looking for the keynotes, go hit that link for sure. Okay, well, I guess we'll probably have other Euro stuff come up
Yes.
throughout the rest of the show today, but we'll get right into the news here. We got a whole bunch of stuff, a couple weeks worth, definitely. So first up, we have a series of new Open SMTPD patches have been announced that fix multiple vulnerabilities, and we have links to the Undeadly article here.
But yeah,
So it looks like
Qualls, the company that makes the SSL Labs test your SSL site thing that a lot of people are fans of, they did a full audit of OpenSNMPD and found a number of issues and reported them, and those have all now been fixed.
Okay.
And so it was nice to see. And at the end of the audit, they actually have a special note about how easy it was to work with the OpenBSD people, and how it was a very refreshing experience compared to auditing some other things they've done in the past.
Okay. So it looks like these fixes will all be in 5.7.2.
Well,
so
the fixes that were for stuff found in the audit are in 5.7.2. After that, 2 additional vulnerabilities were found. One of them only affects the portable version, and the other one was a feature that was added after the audit started, so that it was in a version that wasn't in part of the audit. But those are both now fixed as well, so make sure you upgrade to 5.7.3. And if you're
so 5.7.3 is the blessed one. That's the good one now. Okay.
And if you're an OpenBSD user, you just have to apply the latest errata stuff from OpenBSD, and you'll be all good to go. Or you just upgrade to the latest snapshot, and you'll get those automatically.
Sure.
Because obviously the filter feature one doesn't apply, the vulnerability doesn't apply to OpenBSD because that feature has never been imported into OpenBSD yet. It's only available in the portable version.
Okay. Well, very nice. Very nice. Cool. Well, we'll have some other OpenBSD news here in a little bit. But first up, we got a whole bunch of, I guess, a couple weeks worth of FreeBSD updates and things that have landed.
Quite a bit.
So we'll just start going through them here one by one. So first up, it looks like some Zen work has been done here, bumping some of the headers and whatnot from 4.2 to 4.6, which enables support for ARM. Which is
so there'll be, I think there's a follow-up commit to this one, and then there's some commits to the ports tree to make the newer version available. But yes, this will bring Zen 4.6 to FreeBSD and allow you to run it on ARM machines, which is very interesting with the concurrent work that's going on to bring us ARM64 or AR64 support and so on, which has the virtualization offload features and so on.
Okay.
Should be quite interesting.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm looking forward to playing with some Zen stuff here soon. But it looks like we also have had a new Clang has landed, new Clang LLVM 3.7.0. We'll have links to the commit here for that. And then, of course, the release notes as well if you want to find out some of the cool new things it adds.
Also, ZFS got a new feature with the FRU field. So in ZFS's data structures, there's actually a place to keep the FRU code, which is the field replaceable unit. It just means anything you can hot swap, basically. So ZFS already supports storing each VDEV's FRU as part of the VDEV property. And there's code in libzfs to work with this property, but the code that actually populated it was only available in the fault module in Solaris, and it wasn't hooked up in FreeBSD. But now ZFS changed to send a handful of new events whenever a VDEV is added, attached, cleared, or online, as well as when the pool is created or imported. And so now this will populate that field in FreeBSD so that it's easier to track, which hard drive failed, or, tell when it was the same hard drive being reattached versus when a drive was replaced. Which, combined with some stuff from the Dev Summit, will bring us probably closer to a more functional ZFSD and, automatic replacement and hot sparing and all that kind of fun stuff.
Nice. Oh, it's neat to see some of these things starting to land. And speaking of neat stuff, OpenCL has now landed in the parts tree as well. We have a link to the commit on that, but it looks like it's supported on a variety of different chipsets. It looks like some of the Radeon GPUs. Also, looks like Intel GPUs starting with Ivy Bridge as well.
Yes.
So that's pretty cool that we can do that now. It looks like there's already several OpenCL-based math ports that have been added as well, such as CL Blast, CL FFT, and CL RNG. So we have a link to the commit here, and there's also a link in the commit to the wiki for the OpenCL stuff specifically. Yes. So if it's something you want to mess about with, definitely go take a
Yeah,
look
I
at
know
that.
a lot of people have been asking about support for that kind of GPU stuff on BSD, so it's good to see
hmm
that happening.
And they're also asking specifically for any reports on non-x86
Mm-hmm.
hardware, since they changed the framework quite a bit just to make sure stuff still work. And Coop here reminds me in chat that you still need a supported KMS
Right.
driver as well. So, yep.
And then we have the
Yeah, that's pretty.
blockbuster announcement that swept over EuroBSDCon as
Mhm.
late in the night at the end of the Dev Summit, which he wasn't actually at, he was at home, but Peter Greehan's committed Windows support to Beehive as of
Ooh.
Sunday, October 4th.
And not only that, it's using the UEFI
Yes,
firmware
so
as well.
Beehive now has a UEFI stack with both a regular UEFI and a CSM, or that's what the legacy mode.
It's like the BIOS
Yeah.
compat
Yeah,
stuff.
so you have EFI and the BIOS compat on top of the original ways you can do, the FreeBSD, the Beehive load or Grub Beehive. But this provides UEFI support, and they have it working with Windows. There's still no graphics provided by Beehive, so there's instructions in this post here about how to repack a Windows ISO to have the unintended install XML file and set it all up. So that you just boot it and it does everything itself, and then it'll reboot and come up, and then you just RDP into it. But all the instructions are here in the doc, and as long as you have FreeBSD head after revision 288.524, which there should be a snapshot of that coming out soon if you don't want to compile it, and you'll be able to run Windows in Beehive.
Very nice, very nice. I wonder how long it'll be before we have just RDP support in Beehive itself.
I've seen
like VirtualBox
I've seen a
does.
demo of VNC built into Beehive. It's just not been
Okay.
committed yet. It's
because that would make the
horrifically
installation
slow.
like
Yes.
doable. Well, yeah, but
yes,
it's doable.
exactly.
You
You
know?
only use it to. So he's. I've seen Peter do it to install Windows 8.1 and he was using the Metro interface via this VNC thing on his laptop to show me that it worked.
Oh.
So it's coming.
That is cool. I say that would make it almost possible for us to do a GUI for it at some point.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay. Well, exciting time.
Also, the UEFI support with the CSM module also means that you can now run Illumos under Beehive as well. So if you
Nice.
grab SmartOS or one of the other distros of Illumos, and you can just hook that up pretty much the same way you do Windows, except for you use the CSM module instead of the plain EFI one, and fire that up, and you're good to go.
Oh, that is pretty cool. So you can have ZFS with a ZFS client inside there. How cool is
Exactly. Well, this hopefully will make it easier for doing ZFS development on FreeBSD because you have to compile test it on Illumos before you can commit it to Illumos, and so having that is ready to go.
So he said this has already been tested with SmartOS and also OpenIndiana and OmniOS. So very cool, very cool. And he has links to the example commands here and how to do that.
Exactly.
Well, great, man. That's a lot of exciting stuff happened in the last couple of weeks.
It's it just goes to show what can happen when Peter isn't out surfing.
Right? Too much surfboard time, more time hacking.
But yeah, so
Great.
a lot of interesting stuff happening. We obviously couldn't cover everything, but we thought those would be the things people are most interested in that have been happening with FreeBSD over the last little bit. But if we missed something you're interested in, send us an email and we'll mention it next week.
Definitely a lot of commits.
Yeah, we couldn't read them all.
So, okay. Well, next up, speaking of interesting things happening, OpenBSD had an interesting one that I saw go by earlier, which it looks like they have landed some initial support for Broadwell GPUs in their development branch. So now they're joining Dragonfly as one of the other BSDs that can do that. So it looks like this brings OpenBSD up to Linux 3.14.52's DRM. And Mark Katenis mentions that it may not be perfect yet and could cause some issues with older hardware, although they're not aware of any major regressions yet. So definitely exciting times, and that's making BSDs a lot better on more modern laptops and hardware. So yeah, keep up the good work, guys. That's awesome.
Yeah. Just as an aside, at the FreeBSD Developer Summit, we had a working group on graphics with John Sebastian and Francois from Dragonfly.
Tell me how that went. I need to know.
They can't promise, but we should have the Haswell graphics before the end of the year.
Okay.
And hopefully, once that's done, it'll be fairly easy to iterate through
Start
Broadwell
tracking.
and get up to, catch up to Dragonfly, because it's got Valley View and Skylake and all that stuff.
Well, at this point, they're doing like features which have power savings and stuff. Like they're not even worried about getting caught up to the latest chipset now. So, well, yeah, we need to get there. But yeah, that's great. And it's good to see OpenBSD's doing that too.
Yeah, and we should, once we get all caught up, that'll be really nice to have.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I'm tired of using the frame buffer driver on my X1 Carbon.
Yeah.
It works, but come on,
And
can't suspend
the other issue is does the projector thing work?
No, it only works on the local monitor. So I have to go back to Visa if I'm going to do that. But I like having the native resolution of the frame buffer driver. So at the moment, that's what I'm using. But hopefully soon, some of these things will just start working. Okay, well, speaking of OpenBSD news, we had some slides that were sent in, so we appreciate you sending those in. I forget the user's name who sent them. Maybe you remember off the top of your head.
I do not, but the slides here, we have one set by Theo and one set by Bob Beck.
Okay, so it looks like the first one here is for the Tame API. So it's a talk that Theo gave in Croatia, and they described, kind of walked through the history and some of the reasoning behind why to do the Tame interface. And he specifically have tried to avoid comparisons to other sandboxing techniques. So, for example, if you've heard us talk about Capsicum or SecComp, because he's not impartial. But some of the long and short of it here is Tame itself is actually pretty small and concise, about 1,200 lines of code.
Yep.
And he had just compared here sandboxing, for example, the file command with systrace might be about 300 lines of code. With Tame, 4 lines.
Yeah. So that's basically when they decided to do Tame was when they built the new file command. I remember when we talked about that a couple months ago, because the old one had some issues and so on. And in doing that, they were like, we need a better way to do this. And they're oh, look at this. If we just, say you're only allowed to do these things and then blah, and then once you're done that, you can do this, and then that's it.
Well, I like his argument he makes here about the idea of optional security as well. He pretty much says that's irrelevant. He says if a mitigation feature has a knob to turn it off, some programs naturally down the road will break, and then they'll advise a user, hey, just turn this feature off, and it works again. When then eventually, if no one uses the feature, it dies. So that's kind of led to OpenBSD's policy of once this is working, these features don't go away. They don't get disabled. If there's a bug, the application bug must be fixed.
Exactly. And
which is a good way to go.
It's the only way to make sure we actually get these security features. Otherwise, you just end up with every program, it's like SE Linux for Linux, right? It's like everybody just tells you to turn it off. It's like, well, then it's not really helping anybody, is it?
That's right. That's right. So we have also talks, or a link to a talk from Bob Beck here, who gave a talk about LibreSSL. I'm not sure where he gave that at.
I think it might have been the same place. I don't know, though.
Okay. But it looks like talking about LibreSSL and just kind of some history here. But when LibreSSL was forked from OpenSSL 1.01g, it contained roughly 388,000 lines of C code. And after about 30 days into LibreSSL, they said they had deleted close to 90,000 lines of C, which is pretty impressive by itself. But then they also point out that the new OpenSSL 102D has 432,000, lots of big numbers here, lines of C, which amounts to about 728 kilobytes total.
No, that's, sorry,
total.
But the interesting thing is that OpenSSL current has over 1 million lines of code, but actually has less.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah,
but has less lines of C than 102D. So it's like
interesting.
They added basically 300,000 lines of what?
750,000 lines, then another 250,000 of something.
Right, but yeah. So how did they add all that that's not C? Like, what is it? That's scary.
Oh man, that is a little scary.
Hitting the magic 1 million mark, whereas
I guess once you hit 1 million, it's legit. Or something. I don't know. Like you win,
or you lose. Actually, probably.
Yeah, in this case.
But so LibreSSL, as of today, is 511,000 lines with only 297,000 of those being C. So with 125,000 fewer lines of C, that's a lot fewer places for things to go wrong.
Well, and they can point to proof of that now. So none of the high-risk CVEs that have come out recently against OpenSSL, and there's been 5 of those, none of those have affected LibreSSL. So it turns out that indeed removing the old code and getting rid of unneeded features is good for security. So
Who would have
yeah, we
guessed?
applaud your efforts, guys. I know, right? This just makes sense. But on the talk as well, if you want to go look at the slides, he also focuses a little bit on libTLS, which is the alternative to the OpenSSL API, which is designed to be much easier to use and less error
Yeah.
prone. So
You know,
a good example here, if in the libTLS API, if -1's returned, that is an error. No ways around it. But in OpenSSL, maybe it's not an
yeah.
error. You need additional code to
Yeah, so
check.
you check the error node. It's like, oh, if it's one of these, that means you should just retry, or that you should do something else,
Yeah.
rather than, oh, it's an error. And so it just led to having to have all this boilerplate code every time you made a
All
call,
these extra cases. Yeah.
and or forgetting one, or even just the other problem was it had each different version of the TLS protocol or SSL protocol had its own function call, and so you couldn't write a program that would just keep automatically using the best possible crypto. You would write it once, and that was it.
Well, it looks like they've already started converting a lot of utilities over to this. Looks like an OpenBSD, FTP, NC, NTPD, HTTPD, SPAMD, and syslog have already been converted to using the new API. So that's kind of cool. It's already getting a workout. And the OpenBSD Foundation has put out the call that they're looking for donations in order to sponsor another 2 to 3 developers to spend about 6 months dedicated just to LibreSSL and doing some hacking on that, which I can imagine some of the great improvements that would come out of that. So yeah, if you're looking for a place to donate and would like to put some money towards this, this is a very worthwhile cause, which will benefit a lot of people.
Yep.
Okay, well, that wraps up our weekly news segment, but of course, we got an interview next. But before we get into that, we do want to mention the first sponsor this week, which is going to be IX Systems. And by now, you should know the URL, ixsystems.com/BSDNow, where you can go and talk to those guys and get them to build you just about anything, if it's computer related, of course. I mean, within reason. We don't make a lot of cars or anything, but, actually, car, computer, yeah, they might do some crazy stuff. I mean, you saw we showed pictures, what was it, a couple years ago now, the rig they set up with the sound system all around it so they could test vibrations of hard drives to see how it affected your performance. So yeah, they've done some really neat stuff in the past, and they would love to build you your next rig as well. So I need to get in touch with those. Now, Alan, it's been a couple weeks that you didn't order anything
No,
while you were
I've been
gone.
I've been in Sweden the whole time, so
okay.
I hadn't had a chance to buy anything else.
That's right. But yeah, when you talk to the guys at IX Systems, they're going to make it easy for you. These sales guys are actually sales engineers. So a lot of times you just got to tell them the problem you're trying to solve. Like, we need to be able to have this many concurrent users to the database or to this or that.
Yeah.
And then they'll help you figure out like which hardware gives you the most bang for the buck.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is that when you're sizing, especially for storage, and if you're going to be backing VMs or something, is it's not about what the peak number of IOPS you can get is. It's what, under worst case scenario, what is the minimum you're going to be able to get? So that that your VMs are all, you're going to be able to run the number of VMs you need to without everything breaking. It's a bit different. You're not looking at the spec sheet to see what the peak IOPS it can do. It's like, what's the guaranteed level that I can get?
Sure. Yeah, worst case scenario, when everything's firing, can I still do this much traffic or get this many reads or support this many users? So yeah, IX Systems, those guys, they speak this lingo. Like, this is what they do all day. So if you're doing any kind of server for open source, it doesn't even have to be BSD. They will take pity and do Linux as well, if that's what you got to do. But go ahead and give them a call and get in touch with them. Let them design your next rig for you.
Yes, and like Chris was saying, he missed OLF, but Ken Moore went and he took some pictures and wrote up a blog post about it here on the IX site. So keep checking in there. They always have new and interesting stuff.
We're joined now by Benno Rice, who's a manager of engineering over at EMC Isilon. So first of all, thank you so much for coming on the show with us this week, Benno. We appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Great. And well, this is the first time we've had you on the show. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you first get introduced to and then get involved with BSD?
Go back to about 1995. I got a job with an ISP in Adelaide in Australia, which is where I grew up. And yeah, we were using FreeBSD for a couple of things in there. The main one was, well, there were two. We were actually using it as a router for one particular case because we were just caught short without any hardware at one point. And we were also using it as a news server for those of you who remember when that wasn't just a way of downloading TV. And yeah, so I got involved as a sort of user/administrator at that point. A whole bunch of my friends at the time were also using it. People who were involved in the past, like Mark Newton and Mike Smith. And yeah, I sort of stuck with it as a user, and then I decided I had a bit of during the .com bubble, the first one in 2000. I ended up unemployed for a couple of weeks, and I had a payout from the place that I just left, and I decided that I wanted to get a bit more into the kernel code, and so I decided that one of the things that FreeBSD could do with was a port to PowerPC. So I went out and bought an iMac, the one of the old sort of blue translucent plastic shell ones, and started trying to bring up PowerPC on that. And yeah, that progressed reasonably well. And yeah, so that's what got me my commit bit. I went on to do a bit of playing around with ARM and some other bits and pieces, but my main problem was that there's not a lot of paid work on FreeBSD in Australia, so all of this was just spare time stuff.
Sure.
And then a while after I'd kind of stopped doing any FreeBSD stuff because I just didn't have time, I happened to be hanging around on one of the IRC channels when Jeff Roberson mentioned that Isilon were looking to hire people, and I jokingly suggested that I would happily look at that if I could stay in Melbourne at that point, and it turned out that was possible. So now I actually have a paid job working on FreeBSD, which is awesome.
So what are some of the other things that you've worked on in the past that we can blame you for?
I worked on those are the main ones. The PowerPC port. Oh, the UEFI stuff that I did. That was amusing. I also, at one point, I don't know if this ever made it into the tree, but there was I did a bit of work on a PCI ADSL card, which was, I don't know if the driver made it in, but I think some of the changes that I made to the ATM stack made it in, because this thing was the ADSL equivalent of a Win modem. It was a DSP that would just DMA ATM cells into memory and then let you deal with them from there. And so I had to write my own AAL5 layer and all that kind of fun.
Okay. So how exactly does Isilon use BSD?
Isilon, for those who are unfamiliar with it, is a clustered storage platform. You buy a number of nodes from us. The minimum number is 3. They are connected over a back-end fabric, and they present one file system through the front-end network that is shareable via NFS, SMB, HDFS, a couple of other protocols as well that are less interesting, but that's the main thing. And the entire cluster is fault-tolerant and scalable. So as your storage requirements expand, you just add more nodes, plug them into the back-end fabric, they join, the whole thing balances out, and you have more space and more IOPS with which to serve it. So the hardware itself is not actually overly interesting. It's fairly standard x86 server grade stuff. We use InfiniBand as the back-end fabric. We use Ethernet on the front because what else would you use? Sure. And the only real custom stuff in there is some NVRAM parts that we use for our journal and things like that. But of course, it being just fairly standard kit, you need an operating system on it. We call ours 1FS, which is at its core a fairly reasonably modified FreeBSD version. The currently shipping versions are based on a very old FreeBSD. We're talking FreeBSD 7-ish, but with a heavy amount of backporting. But we're working on a release that will be out at some point where we've updated it to FreeBSD head.
Okay.
That's a big jump.
Yeah, that is.
Its head as at about the 10.0 or 10.1 branch point.
Okay.
So it's not up to date head, but it was still like a 5-year jump.
Sure. Sure. I imagine you can tell all kinds of stories about getting that rolling.
Oh, I've given a couple of talks on it, and yeah, it was an epic project. I joined Isilon in February of 2013, and it was the project I was put on then. We got it merged into our development head in the second quarter of last year.
Oh wow. Okay.
And the release that it's going to be coming out with, we're in the kind of final stages of getting that done from an engineering right now.
Cool. So what are some of the lessons you've learned from building a FreeBSD derived product? And what things would you do
Well, it's
differently?
interesting because it's not so much that I built it, but I've come in at a certain point where we really need to do these things. And one of the interesting parts that I've come across is that you see a lot of organizations that build products and sometimes even services on top of FreeBSD have this approach that they'll just run the latest stable branch. And that seems on the surface of it to be the right thing to do. But what I've come to the conclusion of is the depends a lot more on how much release engineering and testing that you're putting in yourself. Because if you're putting enough in, you're actually a lot better off running head than you are running the stable branch. Because the problem with stable branches is that as you move from one to the next, you effectively have to port any modifications you've got from the stable branch you're on to the stable branch you're moving to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of why Isilon stopped, is they stopped seeing the value in that and didn't realize the problem that was going to cause them until they were having to bring them up, like skip stable 8 and eventually stable 9 and start looking at stable 10. And that just started getting unworkable.
Sure.
And so, given that we're a storage company, and one of our key selling criteria is that your data should never go away once it's on our cluster, we take our testing very seriously, and so our release engineering process means that we could take head, and if we do find bugs in it, we would generally find them before our customers do. Well, at least that's the intent,
Mm-hmm.
and we can fix them. And if they turn out to be upstream head bugs, then that's great because we can contribute those bug fixes straight back. And we've been actively doing that. You can actually see a bunch of commits that have come in over the last year and a half from that have sponsored by EMC Isilon on them, where we've actually found issues in FreeBSD and have started contributing code back, which Isilon's contributed code back in the past, but what I'm trying to do, and I'm the manager of the team that handles our relationship with FreeBSD, is I very much want to start contributing more, and there are other features and changes to the system that we could really use. And my intent is to develop those in FreeBSD and pull them back. And being synchronized to head rather than a stable branch means that we can do that within one of our release cycles, rather than having to wait for that to merge back into a stable branch and then bring it in then.
Right, and it's a lot easier to merge stuff that way than oh, we have this patch against stable 8,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't really merge into head, and
Yeah. And I mean, we ran into huge problems because one of our first attempts was to try and get up to about 8-ish using a rather sort of a very slow, methodical method where we were simply applying changes from FreeBSD Subversion on top of our code to try and bring it up to date. And that gave us a certain level of predictability, but unfortunately it was just way too slow. And one of the things that hurt us during that was that we use InfiniBand, but we were using an internally developed InfiniBand stack, which was kind of the precursor to the one that got committed into upstream FreeBSD.
Mm-hmm.
And it was built on top of the L2 routing code that was present in 7, and when the L2 routing code changed between 7 and 8, it completely blew our stack apart.
Sure.
And it just made everything really, really painful.
So how do you guys how do you do the balance between engineering time when you're driving the product forward and then trying to keep up with changes in FreeBSD?
Well, so this is going to be an interesting one. We haven't actually gotten to that point yet. We've been stabilizing this release. I've got a background task going on at the moment where we're bringing in all the changes that have come in between when we stopped taking them and now. And that's moving slowly because we don't have a whole lot of time to apply to it, and because occasionally we get changes that break things, we have to stop everything and work out what's going on. But the intention is to switch back to my kind of revision at a time approach, and it just happens as a background task through all the releases, and we drop a lump of tested integrated FreeBSD code in at the start of each of our major release trains. So as we start developing a new major release, we drop in more FreeBSD code that brings us up to date with head at that point, and then we just keep going. So the intent is that keeping up to date with FreeBSD should not actually involve a significant sink of time from an engineering perspective.
Okay. Yeah, well, especially, if you can reduce the diff by getting more of the new features actually in FreeBSD, and then you're just using them, it means that's fewer patches you have to try to carry forward every time.
So I guess
exactly.
We'll have to have a follow-up in a couple of years where we then ask you how that's worked out for you.
Yeah. Well, one of the other projects that we've got for the next release is actually to start going through our diffs against FreeBSD with a fine-tooth comb and really start categorizing them into things that we can't contribute up for intellectual property reasons, things that we should just contribute up right now, things that may not make a sense upstream, and so we just have to wear them, and things that we could try and re-implement better upstream and bring back.
Yeah. So
because the whole intent is to try and reduce our diff to just the bits we actually need.
Right, and to try to keep them from getting too messy. And
I mean the thing is that we do have changes that aren't necessarily the kind of change we can't upstream due to copyright or intellectual property reasons, but they also may not make sense upstream.
Right.
We've got a bunch of changes to things like the VFS, the vNode layer, and a couple of other places that are there because our file system has vNodes that may be resident on other nodes, and so they need to know how to go and get those. And that doesn't make sense in upstream FreeBSD, but it makes sense to us, even though it's not necessarily a core piece of IP. One change that we do have that we've been talking to a few people about, we just haven't managed to get the momentum on upstreaming it properly, is we have a different type of credential structure where we can actually do things like deal with Microsoft SIDs as user identifiers.
Okay,
things like
that would be nice to have upstream, I think.
Yeah, it's just a matter of working out how we upstream it, and I mean there are security implications if we screw things up and all that kind of stuff. So we want to do it carefully, but at some point I think we'll try and get that one up.
Yeah, and then there's always the question of is this patch in good enough shape to actually upstream, or does it need some work first? And then it's like, where do we get time to fix this?
Yeah. Yep.
So,
but yeah, the more bits of our stuff that aren't restricted that we can push upstream, the better it is for us, because that's less code that we're maintaining.
Exactly.
Directly.
So,
and I mean, a lot of it came down to, and this is something that I think other FreeBSD using organizations need to think about, is that had we stayed on the version of FreeBSD we were using, we would effectively own that code.
Sure.
Because no one else is looking after it. And so the longer you sit on a stable branch, the more effort you are having to put in to maintain that. Whereas if you spent that same amount of effort staying up to date with head, you'd be getting more features and stuff, and more performance, more whatever that you're getting out of FreeBSD head. It's just better for everyone.
Exactly. The more people that are basing their products on head means that they're kind of amortizing the work out between all of them, and it pushes things forward faster and makes it less work for everyone.
Yep.
So speaking of that, how does Isilon plan to better engage with upstream FreeBSD and the broader community in general? Like maybe finding other companies that share interests.
We've got a couple of things that I'm trying to sort out. One that's actually been working fairly well for us is we've been working with, for instance, the guys at Netflix. Because the nice thing is that we have some similarity in our usage profiles, in that we're both trying to get data from disks out of network interfaces as quickly as possible. I mean, our workload obviously is different to theirs in that we have writes. Most of our stuff is sort of LAN or sort of not exactly as WAN as theirs is. They're delivering over long links to customers, where we're generally delivering over sort of data center and office links. But that said, we care about the state of drivers in FreeBSD in both NIC and HBA. We care about platform stuff. We care about a whole bunch of common things. And the nice thing is that EMC and Netflix don't compete. So my bosses don't have any problem at all with me going out and talking to Scott Long and Lawrence Stewart and Warner Losh over at Netflix and saying, right, we're seeing this problem. Are you seeing this problem? Can we work together on this?
That's cool.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to also talk to various device vendors as well. So, NIC vendors and HBA vendors, and trying to, help them to have better FreeBSD drivers.
I definitely think it's important to, have places like EMC and Netflix and Limelight and so on beating on the vendors, being like, hey, FreeBSD is a thing, and a lot of us are using it. And
yep. Well, I mean, the reality of the reality of it is that FreeBSD doesn't shift as many units for them as Linux or Windows or ESXi does, and so we kind of need to structure our engagement with them with that in mind. But that said, when I walk in and say I'm from EMC and I want to talk to you about your drivers, that carries a lot more weight than, hi, I'm Benno, I just walked in off the street and I want to talk to you about your drivers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to make the best use of that as I can.
Yeah, and
Nice.
at BSDCon there was some talk about a little kind of a temporary consortium to work on some of the TCP/IP code between Limelight, Netflix,
well, I think
and
that may have grown out of some discussions that we had at BSD Cam in Cambridge.
Mm-hmm.
There was a discussion about networking there, where there was a lot of talk about how do we do performance, and while we're doing performance, how do we not break everything?
Right.
And so there's sort of two parallel discussions about how can we improve the performance of the TCP stack, versus how can we test it once we've changed it in order to make sure we don't break it.
Sure.
But also just the fact that it's of broad interest to this big list of entities,
Everyone.
and so we can kind of come up with a pool of money to get the work done.
Yeah, and I'm trying to see what I can do on that in that front as well. Just trying to see what resources I can put in, because I manage two teams here at Isilon. I manage the OS team that I mentioned before, but I also manage the networking team, and so I'm very invested in making sure that FreeBSD's networking is good.
Okay. So you mentioned just earlier about some of the things you worked on. You mentioned UEFI, and you did a lot of the work to bring that up on FreeBSD. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's a funny story. So I bought a machine a while back to be a games machine, because everyone needs one machine running Windows so that they can play games on, right?
Yeah.
And so I was running Windows on that, and I just sort of was in the stages of finishing off signing the contract with take the job at Isilon. I figured, well, I could turn this into a FreeBSD machine, like dual booted, so that I could do some FreeBSD work on this as well. So I went out down the shop and I bought myself a new SSD so I could install FreeBSD on it, and I installed that and turned it on, and it didn't boot.
Of course, right?
And I eventually worked out that what was going on is that the SSD was pre-formatted. And it was pre-formatted with GPT and an EFI partition. And the BIOS on my system had seen that and gone, oh, I'm not legacy BIOS anymore, I'm UEFI. And refused to legacy BIOS boot at all, so I had to reinstall Windows, thanks very much. And then I was looking at FreeBSD going, well, crap.
So was this a weekend project or something?
Oh no, I was kind of in between. I'd finished a contract and was about to start at Isilon, so it was kind of like the PowerPC thing. I had some unbroken time on which to work on this, and so I grabbed the QEMU UEFI, the Tiano core stuff. It's the kind of the reference implementation, and just started trying to get FreeBSD, Loader, to work on it. And yeah, I mean, it's fairly straightforward. The biggest issue that I had with it was that Clang at the time lacked the attribute to say this function is called using Microsoft ABI semantics rather than everyone else's ABI semantics, because EFI has to use the Microsoft stuff. And so you can declare all the entry points as functions that take the MS ABI calling convention, and then you can just start calling into EFI to get stuff done. And so, getting the basic kind of interaction stuff like printing up prompts and all that kind of stuff wasn't too hard. The fun part was actually loading data in and then booting the kernel. And AMD 64 is actually nice in this front because it just expects Loader to have set everything up and turned on paging and everything. And EFI runs with paging enabled, but everything's just one-to-one mapped. And so that all worked out fairly well. The real fun that I had was when I actually tried to boot the aforementioned games machine once I'd actually got everything working under QEMU, and it just, after I hit boot, it just completely fizzled, and I couldn't work out what was going on until I realized that I wasn't. I'd had to write this thing to allocate memory, load the kernel into that, and then bounce it into place, because the kernel needs to be at a particular physical address, or it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And what was happening was I'd allocated some memory, and then I bounced it, and it turned out that I was bouncing it on top of loader.
Oh, oops.
So, funnily enough, everything stopped working at that point. So I had to rewrite some stuff, and there are still some issues in there. In that UEFI expects that you will leave any memory that it has allocated alone until you exit boot services, and FreeBSD is effectively statically linked in that regard. It needs to be at the OXC whatever address point in order to work, and it may not be able to go there and leave the UEFI memory alone because there's no constraint that means it will always get that piece of memory. So one of the things that needs to be fixed in UEFI, and I unfortunately don't have the cycles to work on it anymore, is to make sure that is to do something like make the kernel properly dynamically locatable so that we can avoid that. And the problem being that there are performance implications inherent in that. We get a little bit of performance from being able to reliably know where things are, as opposed to having to indirect to them via a base pointer.
Right.
Well, that's a good segue for your next question here,
Yeah. So are there still other things that need to be implemented in UEFI? And
the main ones are that the relocatable kernel thing that I mentioned. The other one is that we don't actually have the bits in place to allow the kernel to call into the boot services. So UEFI, UEFI has a memory map, and what you're supposed to do is when you exit boot services, you can remap some parts of UEFI's memory and then tell it where you put them. And then you can call into boot service to do things like check NVRAM and stuff like that. I hate to do this to you. Can I just pause for a sec?
Sure.
Because there's someone I need to talk to. I'll be back in just a second.
No problem.
Sure, no problem. Well, no, we'll have to cut and paste the interview.
No, I think I'll just keep it going and have Rakai trim it together.
Snippet.
It might be easier for him that way, I think, he said last time.
Sounds good.
Because we had that one where somebody got disconnected and I gave him like 6 pieces and he was like, next time, just go straight through.
Yeah, right? Probably just easier to trim that out. Hey, I'm tired. It's going to take a couple days.
Yeah, I know.
Back to normal.
I don't have that many days.
Yeah.
I have, I leave Wednesday morning next week.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
When your boss knocks at your door, you kind of need to go just make sure it's not something urgent.
Yeah, right. So the server's on fire? Is that normal? Or
So yeah, things that need to be done in UEFI. So yeah, setting and getting NVRAM variables is the big one that we'd get out of that, and possibly access to some of the in-kernel drivers, because I mean, you can do some pretty interesting things with UEFI, and UEFI can have resident services that can do interesting stuff. So there's possibilities there for people who are making appliances like us, because we're about to move to UEFI, and there's some stuff that we're going to be doing in UEFI that might benefit from that. So it may actually end up that I'm able to put some cycles from one of my people on getting the rest of that UEFI stuff working.
Yeah, I can see, some of the, even like the Nano BSD style, boot off this partition, and then if after an upgrade, and if it doesn't work, fall back to this one, and stuff like that, where you could just keep track of it in the NVRAM that you get.
Yeah. And I mean, UEFI essentially opens up a whole bunch of stuff that you can do under things like open firmware, but just different.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So, what's one feature, if you had to look out today at say FreeBSD, what's one thing you wish it had that you would like to do if you had unlimited time to do it?
Oh, good Lord. That's a really interesting question. My problem here is that I've got 3 kids, and so spare time is this foreign concept to me. If I was working on FreeBSD now, I'd be trying to work out how we can implement something a bit akin to what Apple's done with its service management model. I think the kind of the launch D, config D, notify D setup that they have is really, 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 really good, and I think it's a well thought out approach that I think FreeBSD should definitely look at. And so I'm looking at like Kip Macy's next BSD work quite closely because, I mean, I think someone said at one point, I don't think there's a company making a FreeBSD appliance out there that has not replaced or augmented it with something. And that includes us. We have an internal thing called MCP, and yes, that's a Tron reference.
Of course.
And it does a bunch of service management stuff. And I would love to replace that with LaunchD because I think LaunchD would give us a bunch of benefits that we don't get at the moment. And it would also mean that we're not maintaining our own hand-carved rare wood implementation of the same idea.
Okay, well, that's cool. And we will be talking about that in a future episode. I think we got Jordan lined up to interview already.
Yeah, he's good at talking. That'll work.
So what keeps you motivated to work on BSD, especially in that rarely found free time?
Well, unfortunately, I don't do a lot of FreeBSD work in my free time, but I'm kind of that's salvaged by the fact that I can do FreeBSD work in my work time.
Sure.
The thing that keeps me motivated is I just think FreeBSD is a really good code base. I think it's served a lot of people really well for a long time. I think it's really important to have alternatives to things like Linux and stuff, even if it's just keeping them honest. I mean, I think back in the day when everything was a LAMP stack, and they'd all discovered this thundering herd problem with Apache, where a thing would come in and wake up every single process, but only one of them needed to respond, and they came up with this brilliant idea called Select Wake One, and somebody was at a conference talking about this amazing thing they invented called Select Wake One, and then David Greenman stands up and says, "Yeah, we've had that in FreeBSD for about 5 years now. How have you found this problem here?" And they went, what?" And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. I mean, I wouldn't claim that we're that advanced over Linux anymore, but there has been circumstance under circumstance where we're shown to be more resilient. We handle load better. Like if you pummel a FreeBSD system, it'll sag, but it won't die, whereas Linux systems are still liable to just keel over and have to be brought back up again. And there's a wealth of learning and history in the project that I think is just excellent, and it should live.
Cool. Well, I know you mentioned you have 3 kids. You're probably pretty busy, but do you have any other hobbies outside of BSD?
I should be riding my bike more than I am because it's the only way I get fit, and I live in Seattle now, and so there's plenty of hills to hurt me. I like to cook. I like to have a bit of free time and watch Netflix. I have simple dreams.
Right. Nice.
Right. Well, was there anything else you wanted to mention before we let you get back to work?
No. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, Isilon's always hiring, so if anyone has an interest in working on scalable storage platforms that use FreeBSD, then drop me a line and I'll see what we can find.
Great. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being on the show with us today, Benno. We really appreciate it.
We do.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, we're back. And before we get into the news roundup, of course, we want to mention another sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean. And again, the website's really obvious, but it is digitalocean.com, where you'll want to go and get set up. And guess what? You can roll FreeBSD VMs up in their cloud. How cool is that? And put them in any of their different data centers, which is pretty slick. And if
they have a new data center in Canada now. They announced that just recently.
Which city is that?
In Toronto,
Toronto? Okay. Yeah, very nice. So I imagine that's somewhat close. I guess that's the closest one.
Yes,
you know,
that's
right,
it's probably in the data center that my house is connected directly to. So if I spun up a DigitalOcean VM there, my ping would probably be like 2 milliseconds.
Oh man, that just kills me. I'm so jealous. But anyway, yeah, DigitalOcean is awesome, guys. They make it super easy to get yourself set up in the cloud. And if you don't have any choice and you have to use a Linux, they will allow you to do that as well. But you definitely want to go throw a BSD on one of their VMs. And is the coupon code still going? As far as I know,
you can
free BSD now.
You can even stick that in your account after you've created it. So if you created it for some other way and didn't hear about us before or forgot about the coupon code, you can add it retroactively and still get the $10 credit.
That's right. I mean, that's basically 2 months of running a VM for free. So that's pretty cool. So again, guys, digitalocean.com. And if you speak to them, let them know that, of course, you're a big BSD fan. You heard about it on BSD Now, because they like to get feedback from their community too.
Yes. And remember, you can run machines hourly as well. Just make sure you delete the machine. You can keep a snapshot, but delete the machine when you're done with it. And you only get billed hourly. So, that cheapest instance is 0.7 cents per hour.
So you make that $10 credit last quite a while.
Especially if you're just doing things like, I need to build a bunch of packages, or I need something temporarily.
That's
or
right.
Even, if it's just a Minecraft server, I suppose you could turn it off when you're not using it.
Right. Yeah.
And with their API, you could make like shortcuts on your kid's desktop. Just like start Minecraft server,
fires up the
and
VM.
it would start it up, and then stop Minecraft server. Yeah,
that's actually really brilliant, Allan. Maybe I'll have to do that. That's pretty cool. Okay, well, first up in the news roundup this week. So we've been talking a lot about init and launchd and different replacements, but this week we got word of something new called a relaunchd, which, of course, it has launchd in the title there, but the goals of this project is pretty much trying to keep some of the launchd functionality while being portable enough to run on FreeBSD or Linux, for example. So it doesn't necessarily bring in the whole mock IPC and all that. So it has also aspirations of being launchd++. So what they're looking at doing here is being a little more container aware with support for jailed services, kind of a la Docker, as well as cluster awareness right in it as well. Like the example they give is keep 3 of these web servers running at all times across my cluster or whatever.
Yeah, so it says here, the ability to run services in a coordinated fashion across a cluster of machines. This feature would be similar to Amazon's auto-scaling feature for AWS, but instead of creating new VMs, it would create or destroy containers within a cluster of virtually or physically available machines. The idea is that you would specify things like always make sure there are 2 web server containers running, but run up to 10 if this website gets really busy.
Sure. That's actually a pretty slick idea.
And it mentions that it uses the dbus system activation feature instead of the mock IPC.
That's right. So it looks like they're using a lot of existing tools, though. So cron for scheduled tasks, and it can interact with inetd, anacron, dbus. It could even use systemd on Linux to call certain things, maybe daemon tools, etc. But what I did like, they had a list of what launchd or relaunched will not be. And they said, first of all, it's not designed to take over PID1 or assume the duties of the initial boot process. It's not designed to replace the existing init system, the entire operating system, or it's not trying to be a systemd clone or trying to implement a systemd APIs. And they also don't want to re-implement core functionality of various Unix systems like cron and inetd. So that's some neat design goals there. And we have a link to the GitHub site if you want to take a look at it.
Although, random note, during Jordan Hubbard's talk about launchd in FreeBSD, Paul Vixie, who wrote the cron that's in FreeBSD, said, "Thank you for killing it."
Oh, really? Okay, so he's ready for it to go.
Yes, that tends to be a theme with people. I remember at EuroBSDCon last year, or 2 years ago, 2014 anyway, they were talking about how OpenBSD was getting rid of SendMail, and Erica Holtman was like, "Thank you."
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I'll be glad to see that one come too, personally. Okay. Well, anyway, go check it out. It looks like it's written in Ruby, but don't let that stop you. If you'd like to take a look, we have a link to the GitHub site where you can take a look at some of the ongoing work there. Okay, next up, some NetBSD news this week. And it looks like they landed a new feature. Alistair Crooks has committed a new SID utility, which stands for Static Intrusion Detection, which allows basically type of intrusion detection, of course, by comparing the file system contents to a database of known good values, which is pretty cool.
But it's especially efficient because it uses mmap to open the regular files and tries to be as unintrusive as possible. It also uses an in-memory diff functionality to make it faster, although it will fall back to using temporary files if you're memory constrained.
Sure. But it looks like it can check quite a lot of parameters here, including A time, you have block count, C time, file type, flags, group inode, link targets, M time, number of links, permissions. Then you got size, users, CRC, checksums, SHA-256 checksums, and SHA-512 as
Yeah,
well.
so,
So
you
it's
know,
pretty advanced.
it can tell if something's add or lost, flags like immutable and if the file's been modified or all kinds of stuff.
And even better, it'll emit JSON at the end too,
Exactly.
which I'm sure that'll make it easy to hook it into other stuff as well for any detected problems. For example, this file size has changed, or hey, that link's not pointing where you thought it used to be.
Yes, and then he mentions, in their benchmarks, it was on a heavily output network-bound machine, it takes about 15 seconds to run and only spends 1 second of that in the kernel. And that's to check the root file system, so all your standard binary stuff. And that's running with a maximized nice value as well. And during that, no network drops, no drop in the network rate was noticed. I wonder, this has been imported from an external thing into NetBSD, but I wonder if that's comes from Netflix.
Interesting.
Specifically the mention of heavily network bound, outbound machine. And I know Alistair Crooks did work at Netflix before. I don't know. I don't have reason to think that had changed. So I just wonder if that is maybe where that came from.
Well, if this is something intriguing to you, you will want to check out the commit log. This is not your typical commit message here because it's
got
almost 2-3
documentation
pages
in line with it.
Documentation in it as well. So if you want to see how to use it, how to generate your initial database of values and whatnot, he's got all the commands documented here. So it's definitely pretty complete and cool. So take a look at that if you're on NetBSD. That might be neat. We'll see if that gets ported elsewhere too. Okay, well, next up we have some other LibreSSL news. We've been talking about that already a bit today, but I wanted to mention that for PCBSD users, we've already started pushing out LibreSSL 2.3.0. So if you're running on 10.2 Edge or you're on our current images for October, LibreSSL 2.3.0 is now the default thing. First of all, I got to say special thank you to Bernard Spill, who we've interviewed before, who's done a lot of this work. He's merged in all the LibreSSL changes, and a ton of ports had to get fixed because this is the LibreSSL that actually removes SSL. So this was a non-trivial change. So a lot of ports were broken, and many, many patches, many builds have been run to make sure things work. OpenVPN was fun. A lot of seg faults there, but it's working now.
Well, that's kind of the interesting thing that we were talking about the libTLS API, is that the way you write code against the OpenSSL APIs, you basically specify which version of SSL or TLS you want to use as part of the function calls. Like the name of the function calls are specific to the different versions. Whereas with a Saner API, like Amazon's S2N or the OpenBSD's libTLS, you just specify that, hey, I want to make a connection and use the best possible security, which means that the application won't have to be fixed every time we deprecate an old version or every time you want to use a newer version. So, yes, we've learned from our mistakes, and hopefully once we get rid of all this old cruft because people like Bernard are doing all the work. And he was at EuroBSDCon, and yes, I got to talk to him for quite a bit.
Okay, great. Well, no, his work has been much appreciated. I've been using it here for almost 2 weeks now on my personal desktop and laptop, and we've pushed it out for edge users. We're going to backport that to production users probably the end of this week. So if you're on 10.2, you should be getting the new LibreSSL as well soon. But speaking of which, Allan has some neat information he wants to share here about a new patch set for some OpenSSL stuff happening in the FreeBSD-based system.
Yeah, so I've been doing a little bit of work on this. And so it's to make the OpenSSL that's built into the base of FreeBSD a private library, which is we've done with a couple other things. Like we have a version of, I think, XPath for XML parsing. We have a version of SQLite. That's what package uses. And I think there's like 6 or 8 different libraries we have that are marked private so that only code in the base system uses them, but programs you add to your system can't find them. And that way, if they depend on, say, SQLite, they will get it from the ports tree. So doing this to the OpenSSL in base would mean that, every time you want an application, you would have to pull in OpenSSL or LibreSSL or whatever broken SSL or not boring SSL or whatever,
Yes,
whichever
or-
one you wanted, or the Amazon S2N from the ports tree and compile your app against that. So it prevents the problem of when you're trying to use the one from ports, getting that mix of the one from base and the one from ports, and in general, the one in ports gets updated first because it requires less work to update that one than it does to update the one on the base system. So in general, it's a better best practice for, servers where you're running stuff.
Sure.
But in general, the main goal for me was to remove SSL from the FreeBSD API because we have this stability guarantee, right? The FreeBSD project guarantees that if you're running FreeBSD 10, if you compile a binary on any version of 10, it will work in all future versions of 10, and that they're not going to change anything on you that would break your application or your driver or whatever. And when FreeBSD includes OpenSSL, that means the version of OpenSSL can't change because then the API changes. The problem with that is currently FreeBSD 9.3 includes OpenSSL 0.9.8, which is currently on version like ZF or something, a very large number. But
Sure.
the problem is that OpenSSL has announced that will be end of life as of December 31st of this year. But FreeBSD 9.3 doesn't actually end of life until December 31st of next year,
Oh, man.
leaving a year where the version of OpenSSL isn't officially supported. Now, Red Hat is kind of in the same situation, and so people will backport the patches, and you won't actually be doomed if you're running FreeBSD 9, but we'd rather not have that problem. If this library becomes private, the things in the base system that use it, like fetch and libfetch and package and Kerberos and a couple other things, they'll only use the private version that nobody else uses. And so it'll be possible to just upgrade the version of OpenSSL that's included with the base system from,
Without breaking.
yeah. So, in 10.x, I think we ship 101 or 100. Well, we'll be able to update that to 1.1 when that comes out later on without actually breaking anything, right? Because when we ship that as part of a security update or whatever, you'll just ship new binaries of fetch and libfetch or whatever. And everything that uses them will
not a big deal.
will be fine. And this way, we'll have far fewer problems, I think. So there are some edge cases that I haven't looked at yet, and once it gets a little further along, I will get FreeBSD Port Manager to do an exp run, which will basically try to compile the entire ports tree against this and make a list of all the things that explode. And so it's not entirely clear whether this is actually feasible yet, but I've managed to actually build world and it not throw any errors so far. So we're getting somewhere.
Okay, great. Good deal. Okay, well, next up, I have a little bit more PCBSD news to tease you with. So this last week, we pushed our new October images. And the biggest difference with that is we've started the process of moving back from using only Grub as the bootloader in favor of using FreeBSDs now. So a couple patches have landed, which makes this possible. First of all, we have your patch, Allan, which adds boot environment support to the fourth menus, which was a biggie for us. We couldn't do our upgrades even without those. And then another patch, which allows booting a ZFS en route via UEFI, which was pretty cool. So we imported that as well, and I'm running a couple systems here with it. So this has begun the process of where we will support both. We are actually defaulting now to the FreeBSD loader again. And Grub will still be there because there is some need for it if you want to do dual boot or triple boot or other crazy setups, and the FreeBSD bootloader doesn't do quite what you need. But we will try and support that as well. But one of the cool things about having the FreeBSD loader now is we can do XenDOM 0. So you can package install and get your Xen support, which is pretty slick. To go along with that, I did some upgrades to our badmin utility. So now it seamlessly supports both loaders if you're using BSDs or Grub, and it'll just do the right thing. The nice thing is about it, since we don't have to redo the config files, Allan, like it makes doing a badmin activate or clone or creator or whatever like instant.
Yeah.
Now. It just sets bootfs equals blah, and it's done.
Yeah, well, yeah, because with my code, instead of relying on a config file for a list, it can actually talk to ZFS and get. It's not ultimately, it's not super intelligent, but what it does is looks at what the bootfs is, and that's the default, and it sets that aside. Then it goes up one level and finds all other data sets that are the same, that are siblings to the default one. And those would normally, unless you're got some strange layout, be your other ones. I should probably polish it up a little bit so that you can set an environment variable in loader.conf or something to specify an alternate location in case something weird. But in general, it mostly works. And I guess you've been testing it, and we'll find out anything that doesn't work from the feedback, right?
I've been working with it well enough here. It seems to do the job. I've been pretty pleased with it. The one thing I did have to fix for BAdmin was for EFI specifically, because EFI doesn't have the Beastie menu.
Right.
So I was like, well, how do you set boot environments or whatever? So the BAdmin we're using in PCBSD will now detect if you're on EFI and rewrite the loader.rc file with the default. So it knows that it's going to auto boot whatever you've just set as your new active boot environment at next boot.
So
and you can override that if you hit, I guess, question mark and halt the booting and then type your own in manually. But at least it allows you to use the BAdmin to drive the system now and still reboot into your new environment via EFI.
Yeah, and we'll see if we can come up with some way to actually have a menu. But
that would be nice.
I don't know anything about EFI yet. I've avoided it.
Yep. So the only downside is we don't have the full disk encryption support yet, so you'll still want to use Grub if you're going to do that, unless you have something different to tell me, Allan.
I have Colin Percival, of all people, actually volunteered to help with the assembly. Okay. He's the first person that I've talked to who hasn't run away screaming when I've actually explained the details of it. And he was like, oh, 16-bit assembly is the last one I ever did. I never went further than that. So I actually remember how to do this. And he seems to be having fun trying to do it. And his first two patches so far are just hang and don't boot, but we're debugging it. And
we're getting there.
He and I will sit down probably later this week, hopefully, and hash out and figure out what the little issue is. And if we get that working, that'll be pretty amazing. And then
that will be very.
Then I just have to look at doing the same thing for the EFI bits. But once I get it, the interesting thing is it might actually be easier to do it for EFI rather than for the BIOS boot, because EFI won't have that arbitrary limit in the assembly code that we're suffering with right now. So,
I'll look forward to that. That'll let me finally switch my laptop over, because I still do the full disk encryption. I need Grub for that, because that's how I roll on my laptop.
Yes, so it'll be interesting, and hopefully we can get that going. And with those done, we'll have a pretty compelling system there. And then I have to find time to look at, apparently Illumos imported the FreeBSD bootloader to replace Grub on their side.
Oh, really?
And made some enhancements, but I don't know what they are.
I'm surprised they did that, because I heard now Ubuntu is going to be offering ZFS here in the near future is the word. Yes. So I'd imagine they're going to be doing some more updates to Grub. I don't think they have their own bootloader.
As far as I know, the support for ZFS in Ubuntu will not support root on ZFS. It'll only be for your data drives.
Yep.
Again, with the target being servers less than laptops.
Sure.
But it'll be interesting to see. It'll be great to have a file system where you can put it on a USB stick and go between your Linux and your FreeBSD, and it just works. If only
we just need Windows support,
because we have Mac, Linux, and BSD,
and the Illumos and Solaris.
Exactly.
So
literally,
just need Windows.
Yeah. I don't know how one would do that.
Right? Yeah, who's going to volunteer for the Windows ZFS? But anyway, that would be interesting, because then that would be a universal. Then if it had encryption built in, even better, right? And we have our encryption option too. But anyway.
Yes. Separately, there was some talk about trying to get a port of Geli over to Linux so that when you had to switch between BSD and Linux, you could have the same encrypted file system.
Oh, that would be neat.
Yeah.
That would be neat.
I don't know that there's quite, there's no geom layer, but you might be able to simulate. Well, not simulate, but have hooks in similar places by doing a fuse version. Not that I really want fuse in my Geli, but if I'm just trying, if I have to use Linux, I've already lost. So it's just a matter of, I want to read my damn USB stick, right?
Speaking of running away screaming, when I was messing around with Fuse for our PBI system a couple of years back, that's what made me run away screaming. I was looking at the Fuse implementation, like,
right. Well, in this case, like in the boot code, looking at what I had to do for Geli, it was literally just intercept when you're trying to do a read, after you read, decrypt it, and then return that instead of the encrypted version, and it's kind of a similar thing on write. And then slightly more complicated when you want to handle the authenticity writing, when you write the hash as well into the sector, but it's, not so bad. And obviously, you can save a lot of complexity by removing the complicated bits from Geli. Geli has all the complicated bits to asynchronously push it all into OpenSSL in the kernel or whatever, and handle the encryption with the AES and I and so on. But if you if you're already submitted to using Fuse, you would just do a straight single pipeline AES, and so the performance won't be as good. But it's this is mostly designed for my USB stick or an external hard drive or something, and so the USB bus is going to be the bottleneck, not your CPU anyway. And so at least something working until somebody I've often found that writing something horrible is the best way to get somebody to write something better.
That is true. That is true, because you kind of prove it works, and you do some of the grunt work, and then they're like, "Oh, that's really neat. I need that," but then we rewrite it right for you.
Yeah, that's how the ZFS support and the installer started. I did some terrible, terrible things, and then that inspired someone to fix it up and work with me to actually make something that wasn't disgusting.
Yep. Nice. Okay. Well, let's see. Our last story we have here is some Dragonfly news. So it looks like in the past couple of weeks, Dragonfly, Matthew Dillon specifically, has imported some of the newer Intel wireless drivers, the IWM driver they pulled over from FreeBSD. It looks like. So, of course, if you're on Dragonfly, you already have the awesome DRM and video support, but this makes it even more attractive if you're on a newer laptop. Now you got wireless.
Yeah, if you're on that newer laptop, it has the newer wireless, and so.
So interesting that X1 Carbon I have uses the IWM Wi-Fi driver. Just I don't have the Broadwell on FreeBSD. Right. So that actually may be a great laptop if you're planning on running Dragonfly now. So take a look at that. But also it looks like they've made some progress on starting to do i386 removal for Dragonfly BSD as well. I saw a commitment for that go by, and we have links to that if you'd like to take a look. Okay, it's time for feedback and questions, but really quick before we do that, of course, we want to mention the last sponsor this week, which is going to be TarSnap, where you should be doing backups, and they should already be going, and you should be using TarSnap for that. But if you're not, shame on you. Come on, you've heard us talk about this for a long time now. But there is the off chance maybe this is 5 years in the future and you're just seeing this video for the first time because you stumbled across this thing called BSD Now. So definitely TarSnap's still around. So you need to go get set up with TarSnap and do your backups properly, where everything's fully encrypted before it leaves your box. You can audit the source code yourself, and better yet, compile it from source yourself. If you don't even want to trust the binaries from their site, I mean, there's very good reasons to be that paranoid these days. So definitely check out TarSnap, make your account, and it's dirt cheap. I know, Allan, what are you still on your first $10 or something for like this last year?
I haven't managed to spend $2 yet, and I've been backing up every day since January 1st.
Yeah, it's darn cheap. So again, TarSnap's available, and they have clients for pretty much everything under the sun. So yes, if you are suffering on Linux or heck, even Windows, you can get a client for TarSnap there as well. And if you're already familiar with the command line, you know your way around the tar command. The syntax you'll find is very similar and very easy to get comfortable with and use. So go get signed up today, and of course, let them know that you heard about it on BSD Now. Okay, so first up we have this week, it looks like Dan has written in, and he said, hey, I got a System 76 Meerkat. There's the version of the NUC by Intel, and he's asking if we supply PCBSD on a flash drive. So he said in the NUC he has 4 gigs of memory, 128 gig SSD card that is blank, but originally had Ubuntu on it. He said I put a 500 gig HD on it that has Ubuntu, but I'd like to put PCBSD on the 128 gig SSD and run the Linux programs from it. We don't sell the PCBSD preloaded on the flash drive, but you could install it on there.
I think in this case he's talking about a USB stick that he could then use to install onto the SSD. And
I guess so. Yeah, we have images for that.
Yeah, I think he might have been confused by. I think your images ship is .iso, but they can be burned to a USB stick and they work, right?
Yes. Yes, yes. So those images are hybrids. And if you look at our docs, we have the instructions there. You can just DD that ISO file to your USB stick, and then that gives you your USB flash media. For the October image going forward, we've split that back though. So we now have the two images again because we're using the FreeBSD loader, which doesn't do the fancy hybrid thing. So we'll have the .iso, then the .img file, but it's the exact same process. Just grab the right one and DD it to the image or to your stick, and you're good to go. But yeah, if you're running on 10.2 or anything earlier, then definitely just DD that ISO file and you should be in business.
Be no problem.
Yep. Okay, well, next up we have Matt here. He says, first of all, Allan and Chris, thanks for the awesome show. I look forward to it every week. He said, I currently have a FreeBSD 9.3 server with a RAID Z2 pool with 6 3 terabyte drives. It is primarily a file server, and about 90% of the used storage space on it is uncompressed Blu-ray movie backups and compressed TV shows. When I originally set up the system, I was new to FreeBSD and ZFS, so I made some mistakes like not enabling compression and using 512 block size on 4K drives. Ouch. I hate it when I did that a couple times too early on. That's a stinker.
I have a worse story where I created a pool with 5 sets of 6 drives in RAID Z2 as 4K by using the GNOP hack. And later I upgraded the system to the newer version where you can have just the nice sysctl instead of having to do the GNOP thing. And then I added the last 6 drives that the machine would hold, and I forgot to set the sysctl. So I have 30 drives using 4K, and then 6 drives using 512B. On drives that are definitely 4K. And it's killing the performance of everything. It's like, whoops.
Bummer.
And
that's an annoying one to fix.
Because like he goes on, if it was just the compression, he could do it inside the same data set, right? If you just set compress equals LZ4 or whatever, anything new you write will be compressed that way. So you can just create a new data set for your Blu-rays, set compression on, and then move the files over, and they'll be compressed as they're copied. But when you want to fix the 512 thing, that requires making a new Z pool, and so you need to temporarily move the file somewhere else. That is already fairly difficult with 6 3 terabyte drives. He's with 2 of them being parity, that means he's got 12 terabytes at max of data, and he probably is not quite using it all. But my system has like 80 something terabytes. That's a lot harder to find temporary space for.
Right.
Yeah, that one's going to be fun.
Brother, can you spare 80 hard drives?
Basically. So yeah, it's going to be a little fun to fix that one.
When I did that, I think I had 6 drives, and I ended up just buying 6 new 3 terabyte drives, and I built a new system, essentially. I lived with it for a year or two until it finally annoyed me, and I was like, I'm tired of it being on 5
Yeah, so he goes on to say that, so in order to do this, he plans to borrow some free NAS space from a friend and buy a couple of drives to use as temporary storage for the data. He doesn't think he has enough SATA ports in the server to connect, the 6 drives plus the new ones, so he'll probably do it over the network. He mentions using rsync for that, but I would say if it's ZFS to ZFS, you might be better off, or almost certainly would be better off using ZFS send and receive. It'll be much faster than rsync and more reliable as well. And it will just save you a lot, especially if you're using... you can basically do ZFS send, and then on the receive side, you can actually explicitly set and compress it all. So you can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone with that. And then, create the new Z pool and then ZFS send it all back. You can preserve all of your snapshots and so on, which obviously rsync won't do.
Well, he asked how the plan sounds. So aside from the rsync part, if you switch to the ZFS send and receive, I think you'll be in good business. He's asking if it's worth the hassle just to get 4K blocks of compression. The 4K blocks, for sure. Anyway.
If you can live with the 512 blocks, especially since your load is mostly big files, so it's not about IOPS, then for the compression, you could just create a second data set or a new data set, set compression on it, and then move one at a time or whatever the Blu-rays over to it. Then they would get compressed as they got written to the new one, and then they would get deleted off the old one and free up the space. And so you'd be able to get the compression without having to borrow a friend's FreeNAS or get more hard drives or anything. But to fix the 512B thing, you will have to start
New pool
the new
time.
pool. And I feel your pain because I'm in the same situation, but with a lot more data.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, let us know how that
Yes.
goes, Matt. But hopefully it won't be too painful as long as you plan it out
Yes,
well ahead of
it sounds
time,
very
so
similar.
you don't run into the snag, right?
Yeah,
the
it sounds
middle.
very similar to the plan I did when I had 4 3 terabyte drives in Z1 and wanted to upgrade it to 6 drives in Z2. So I have my 4 original drives, set them there, and I got the 2 new drives. Luckily, my actual usage was only like 5 terabytes out of that pool with the 4 3 terabyte drives. So I got the 2 new drives that I bought, and I split all my data up. It was already in separate data sets, so it was easy to just say, all right, these set of data sets will go to one drive, and these go to the other drive. And then I made sure they were all good, and that I created a new Z pool on each of the 2 drives with no redundancy because I didn't have any more spare disks to do redundancy. And then after I copied them, before I deleted the data off the original drives, I did a scrub to make sure everything was okay on the 2 new drives. Then I erased the original 4 drives and created a new 6 drive Z pool. And for the 2 extra drives that obviously were full of data and I couldn't add to the pool yet, I used the G0 device in FreeBSD to basically create 2 fake hard drives and offline them immediately after creating the pool. So this left me with the 4 hard drives and no parity. Then I copied all the files, or I ZFS send all the stuff from the 2 temporary disks back onto the 4 main disks, then swapped in those 2 disks into the 2 blank spots that I had left in the pool. I don't recommend people do that, but I did it and it didn't explode. Obviously, if a hard drive had failed during that, I would have been in a bad way, but I would have lost half my files.
Yes.
But I at least made sure that I didn't delete the original 4 drives until I was sure the 2 new drives had all the files and they were safe. And then when I moved them back, I did the same thing. I didn't erase the 2 source drives until I was sure the 4 drives in the new pool had all the data and it was okay. Mm-hmm. But anyway, you can do it, and it depends if the 512B thing is bothering you enough. The compression thing you can do without making a new pool, so you might just not bother. It's up to you.
All right. Cool. Well, next up, we won't mention the name here because he asked us not to, but it says, my FreeBSD adventure started out October 11th of last year when my current server booted FreeBSD for the first time. He said, I'm very pleased with the experience, mostly thanks to us, so keep up the good work. Well, we appreciate that. He said, on to the problem, though. He's come into possession 3 HP Compact DC 5850s. It's an old machine that's being retired and will be moving to other facilities, but these make great lab machines, so he wanted to get down and dirty and put more BSD on them. He said the problem is he can't seem to get the BTX loader booting on any of the machines, and he said he's tried multiple media. He said I can get Linux running without problems, so I thought I'd give PCBSD or TrueOS a spin since it stocks Grub as the bootloader, and it just boots, so that works. He said it's not that I dislike PCBSD or TrueOS at all, it's just I'd like to fiddle around with vanilla FreeBSD for multiple reasons, and he's wondering why that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on this?
So I saw Bernard Spill had the same problem with his HP laptop, except for as soon as he got into the BTX loader, instead of freezing like it looks like his does, Bernard's would just reboot immediately. So we'd get you'd see BTX loader, blah blah blah, and then reboot. And I tried everything I knew how to do, and none of it fixed it. I don't know what causes it, but it seems to be specific to like that HP BIOS.
Mm-hmm. That may be a good question for the FreeBSD mailing lists, by the way, like the hackers list or something, just to see if anyone else has run into this on this particular model. But yeah, that's annoying. So I can understand if you want to use vanilla FreeBSD, but if you install TrueOS with our Grub bootloader, I mean, that is pretty much the only difference. You can just package delete. I think there's like 30 packages we install out of box. So you could delete all those and end up with a vanilla FreeBSD 10.2 with Grub as the bootloader. So as a workaround, that's perfectly feasible, and you don't have to use our updating systems or anything, because at that point you'll just be on vanilla FreeBSD again. So yeah, that's one option. But in the meantime, yeah, check out the FreeBSD mailing list just to see if any of the other developers have had access to the machine. I don't have any of those laying around, so I got nothing to play with. You probably don't either, right, Allan?
I don't have any HP hardware.
No.
I've built my own
here.
computers for so long. I don't have any.
Yeah, I haven't had a name branded desktop since like
I
college.
never did. Even
earlier.
when I did, I had like the store brand from the computer store I went to. It was like a Canadian brand, not one anybody else had.
When I was like 16, we bought a Quantex, which was like they got bought out by Dell later, I think, or something. But like that was the last name brand desktop I've ever owned. Everything else has just been, I went and put that together. But laptops, Lenovo's still is what I'm using. So anyway, hope that works for you. Definitely post there, see if you can get any information. If you find a workaround or somebody comes up with a solution, let us know and we'll pass the word along. Okay, well, as we close the show out today, first of all, we're glad to be back. Really enjoyed being here. I know we've had a couple weeks off for travel. Now, are you heading out again soon, Allan? You have other conferences coming up?
I have the OpenZFS Developer Summit, which is the 19th and 20th. And then there's a FreeBSD Dev Summit November 2nd and 3rd.
Okay. Where's the Dev Summit?
At NetApp in Sunnyvale, California.
Okay. Cool. Great. Well, if you guys are going to be in any of those, you get a chance to meet Allan again. I'm not sure what my first conference will be for next year. I'm toying with EuroBSDCon.
Yes, I'm definitely doing Asia, but there's some talk about doing some other stuff that's earlier in the year as well.
Okay, nice. Cool. Well, as we wrap up the show, guys, of course, as usual, send us your questions, comments, or if you have any topics or show ideas, or you find a cool story. You know, sometimes we do mess things in all the commit logs that get passed around out there. So if there's something we have messed, we will definitely mention on the next episode for sure. So send that to feedback@bsdnow.tv. And we appreciate those who have already sent a bunch in the last couple of weeks while we were gone. We got enough material for like another 2 shows just based on all these stories, and we had to cut it down so we wouldn't go crazy on this week.
But yes, thank you guys a lot. It helps a lot to know what you guys are interested in hearing about, but also just
that's true.
You know, sometimes the news can be hard to find. It gets buried, and
that's right.
You know,
yeah, we don't all read the same blogs and whatnot, so you may find a nugget somewhere that we have missed.
Plus,
so
being out of the country, I'm very bad at keeping up with news and email, and I get all out of my regular routine.
Yeah, definitely. So again, we look forward to hearing from you guys, and keep in touch, and we'll see you same time next week.